Hello everybody, it's Storytime Alec here today with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about a comment that I received pertaining to another video that I released 3 days ago. That video was my reaction video to the Chains of Domination finale cinematic that was released on wowhead.com. The comment I received was by Rin Sakurai. Now, Rin and I briefly spoke about how I adamantly oppose Sylvanas getting a redemption arc and how I think her having one is just bad storytelling. And well, Rin's comment to that, it did inspire me to make this video. That being that there is a huge difference between something being bad and you not liking something. So we have to show how exactly this is a bad redemption arc, especially when the arc isn't complete yet. And I couldn't agree more. And so with this video, I intend to prove that Sylvanas is simply not worthy of a redemption arc. Now, first, I want to talk about the two different types of good redemption arcs that are popularly featured. Now, the first is when an antagonist, or a villain in general, realizes the error of their ways and is subsequently killed before they can atone. Some notable examples of this are Darth Vader and possibly Arthas Menethil, who expressed a seemingly sense of remorse and regret for what he had done, as well as disbelief just before he died. Now, the second type of redemption arc is when a villain realizes the error of their ways and then spends a very long amount of time attempting to atone for what they have done. An example of this type of redemption arc could be the Knights of the Ebon Blade, who after regaining their freedom dedicated themselves to being protectors of life and defenders of Azeroth, going as far as to leave Azeroth and travel beyond the Veil to the Maw to put an end to the Jailer's plans. Now, saying that somebody, if they follow this format, will have a good redemption arc is not entirely true. A character has to meet a certain criteria in order to constitute being worthy of a redemption arc. Characters who are blatantly evil without being mind controlled or very thoroughly manipulated by a more devious and powerful force simply do not deserve a redemption arc if they do not have those things involved in their story, and Sylvanas doesn't. Now, I know some of you may say, the Jailer may have spun a very good story, but Anduin put it quite nicely. Look around you, Sylvanas, at who and what you've joined. And she should have done that far quicker. I think she would have realized that she was serving the devil himself if she had. But even so, Sylvanas committed many acts of evil that she was compliant with and perpetrated on her own. She may have done it in the Jailer's name, but they were her acts and her plans. And I'm going to talk about those now. The reasons why Sylvanas is simply not worthy of a redemption arc. But first, let's talk about the rule that Sylvanas instituted originally when resurrecting undead. And that was she would give them 3 choices. The first choice was to forge their own destiny as an undead apart from the Horde and apart from the Forsaken. They would go about their own lives without interference from either Sylvanas or the Horde, or any undead under her service. The second option was they could return to the afterlife and live peacefully in death. The third option is they would pledge themselves to her service and to the service of the Horde. But when Cataclysm came around, that rule went flying out the window, and that was shown quite perfectly and quite clearly by the invasion of Silverpine Forest and Gilneas. Sylvanas stated during Cataclysm that the undead could not procreate, and therefore were doomed to wither away and die if they did not attain more corpses to fill their ranks. And so Sylvanas ordered the invasion of Silverpine Forest and Gilneas. The Forsaken under Sylvanas pursued the Gilneans without mercy, using every tool in their arsenal to kill and raise them into the service of the Banshee Queen. It even resulted in the death of the crowned prince Liam Greymane, and forced the Gilneans to flee their homeland across the sea to the home of the Night Elves. Now, Garrosh quite eloquently pointed out that there is no difference now between Sylvanas and the Lich King. Sylvanas used the Valkyr, just as the Lich King did, to resurrect new undead into her service, and they would serve her or they would suffer until they did. This is something the Lich King did, and this is something that Sylvanas did too. A blatant act of evil that defied everything she previously stood for before she experienced death again and experienced where she would end up. Now, back then, when that lore was created and instituted into the wider arcing lore of World of Warcraft, the whole idea of the Maw and the more hammered out Shadowlands with the realms and the Pantheon of Death and whatnot, that had not yet been instituted. But it's pretty clear that Sylvanas ended up in the Maw, where she met the jailer and they devised their plan. Now, another act that Sylvanas has perpetrated, one that has also damaged her chances at getting a very good redemption arc and even being worthy of one, was what she did to the Death Knight Kultiri Deathweaver. During the Battle of Anderhall, Kultira met with his fellow Death Knight and Ebonblade member Thessarian, who he had had a close relationship with even during their time as members of the Scourge. The two agreed, after fighting the Scourge and each other, they would reach a truce. The Alliance would pull out of Anderhall, the Horde would regroup, and then the battle would be over. Kultira had successfully won Anderhall for the Forsaken and avoided an unnecessary expenditure of lives on both sides. Instead of rewarding Kultira for his ingenuity and for his victory, Sylvanas decided to punish him for his weakness. Kultira failed to kill Thessarian. He failed to slaughter the Alliance and raise them as new undead in her service, and so she would purge him of his compassion and make him her servant. Kultira was taken to the Undercity, where he has spent several years, up until Legion, when he was freed. But in that time, he has been exposed to horrors that we cannot imagine. Now, this is a special act of evil. Kultira was victorious. He won the Battle of Anderhall for the Horde and for the Forsaken, but because he did not relentlessly pursue Thessarian and the Alliance forces to their graves, he was punished. But this third act, and possibly Sylvanas' greatest act of evil, is one we are all quite familiar with, and that is the burning of Teldrassil. During her campaign against the Night Elves, Sylvanas and the Horde made great gains in Kalimdor, fighting all the way up to the very base of the World Tree, where the Night Elves called home. The Night Elves were on their knees and poised to surrender. Malfurion had been wounded greatly by Saurfang, and Tyrande had escaped with Malfurion, since Saurfang and Sylvanas neither decided to finish him off. In that moment, Sylvanas made a choice as she stood on the shores of Darkshore. She made a choice to not let the Night Elves surrender, to not take them as prisoners of war, but to make them all suffer and die. By her order, the world tree was set ablaze. The night elves screamed as their flesh burned, and their people and their home both died all around them. All that was left was the burnt corpses and the husk of what they once called home. All these souls were sent straight to the maw, where they all suffered. And in the following Battle of Darkshore, Sylvanas took it a step ahead and resurrected the fallen night elves to serve as Dark Rangers. They were servants, they were slaves. They had no free will of their own. Everything they did, the killing of their own people who they once called friends, family, it was all done without their will, without their consent. Sylvanas once again used her power. She used the Valkyr, and she used it for nefarious purposes. The purpose of forcing new servants into undeath. This is an act of evil that is very detrimental to Sylvanas' character. She had already killed most of the Night Elf populace, destroyed their home, and then decided to resurrect them as her slaves and force them to hunt what was left of their dwindling people, to drive the Night Elves to the very brink of extinction, and maybe entire extinction. Now, these notable acts of evil that Sylvanas has perpetrated and done willingly in the name of the jailer, they simply make her unworthy of a redemption arc. And there are far more other acts of evil that she has done, ones that I will mention briefly, not as thoroughly as the other ones, as mentioning them all would take a very long video. But for the moment, here are Sylvanas' dishonorable mentions. Perpetrating the Wrathgate fiasco from behind the scenes, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of Horde and Alliance troops, including Bolvar Fordragon, who, though survived, was forced to become the Lich King and could never return home. Consorting with Helia to enslave the Valkyr, who were still loyal to Odin, so that she could endlessly raise undead and endlessly bring herself back to life. Murdering the Desolate Council and several other undead in cold blood at the diplomatic event that occurred between the humans and the Forsaken during one of Christie Golden's novels. Using the plague on Horde and Alliance soldiers both, and subsequently resurrecting them as mindless servants to fight against the Alliance forces during the Battle of Lordaeron. The resurrection and attempted brainwash of Derek Proudmoore, who she attempted to turn to serve as the purpose of a suicide bomber to kill his entire family, the Proudmoore royalty. Using her power and the power of Kingsmorn to forcibly submit Anduin to the jailer's will, so that he could serve as Zoval's vessel. And then pretty much every other act that she has perpetrated throughout the Shadowlands expansion, including the torture of characters such as Thrall, Jaina, Bane, and the Death Knights of the Ebon Blade, who were also captured, whether she directly was involved with it or just a complicit partner. Now, in my opinion, the only way that Sylvanas can get out of this and still meet the criteria for a redemption arc is if they say that somehow Zoval, having her other half of her soul, allowed him to manipulate her. However, Sylvanas showing defiance of the jailer in the cinematic that was recently released on wowhead.com for her fate it kind of makes that unlikely, as this shows that Sylvanas did have the will to resist. So all the previous acts that she has perpetrated, she did as a compliant partner. It was not as if she had no soul. She had one in the beginning, but as she continued to commit acts of evil, she did so compliantly, and therefore negates any type of mind control defense. She may have been deceived by Zoval's grand tale of a great betrayal that was done upon him and how the afterlife is unfair, but in truth, I think Sylvanas was motivated by one simple fact. She is trying to avoid her fate. She does not want to spend an eternity in the maw, so she continues to dig her own grave by committing act of evil after act of evil. And now, she does not deserve a redemption arc. If Blizzard gives her one, I can tell you, I think most of the populace of World of Warcraft is going to be quite angry and displeased. I know I will be displeased, because characters like Arthas, who were manipulated, who had the Nathrezim orchestrate a series of events that all led up to the moment where he would take up Frostmourne and sacrifice his soul for the noble goal of saving his people. Those types of characters deserve redemption arcs because they were deceived. Sylvanas may use Zoval as a shield against responsibility, but the responsibility is hers and hers alone. And she needs to be held to account for all the atrocities that she has committed over the expansions. She is the true villain here, and she needs to be put down. But with that, I think I'll conclude the video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for watching the video. Have a nice day.